Good evening. Welcome to another Edgar Cayce on. This time we are going to compare and contrast the Edgar Cayce readings with the material in A Course in Miracles. This is a kind of an abbreviated cover of the official book that they have, and there's three parts to it. And what you have the text, the actual text that was channeled work, and you'll see more about that in a minute. It also has a workbook and a teacher's manual all included in that one thing. If you've ever picked one of these up, I don't know how it compares to the Bible. Does anybody know? If I had to guess, it's as much or more material as is in a regular Old and New Testament King James version of the Bible. So this is the text that most everything is coming off of today. I do need to start this with a disclaimer because obviously this is all according to me. I have read the Cayce materials. I have read so much about A Course in Miracles now, and this presentation is my take on that. So I invite you to ask questions, and we can delve into any part of it deeper if it doesn't seem to come across clearly. But the information here is strictly according to me. I remember online with the YouTube crowd, I once had somebody say, well, you keep saying this is your interpretation of it. What's the official ARE, or Association for Research and Enlightenment's, position on all this information? I said, there isn't one. All they do is present the information, and then you go ahead and figure it out for yourself, what works for you. And the Course in Miracles is not really that different. So you wind up having this book, and then you have all these pundits that are out there. But let me start with where it began. This is Helen Schucman over here. And in 1965, she started channeling, and it took her 7 years because it went to 1972 as far as being able to channel the works that she has turned into A Course in Miracles. Along the way, this gentleman, Ken Wapnick, came along and was very instrumental in being able to put it into book form. So helped her be able to do that. I believe it finally came together in about 75 or 76 was when the Course in Miracles was finally released as a book. Now, this is, I'll just bring this up and I won't go into it anymore. There is a big lawsuit that was out there saying that there was more than one version of A Course in Miracles. And you may or may not have seen this cover at some point in your past. It's not an allowed version anymore after the lawsuit, and I think that was in the early 2000s or something when that was finally resolved to come back to that one. So this is the official Course in Miracles text, etc., that this is all put together from. All right, so we're the other thing that comes up along this is this is just a partial list of all of the books that people have written that say, here's how to apply the principles in A Course in Miracles today in your everyday life. And these are not all in agreement with each other. And it's no different for the Cayce readings. When you wind up having people say, here's how to apply the Cayce readings in your life, you can have different points of view, and none of them wind up being the official perspective of the ARE. So just keep in mind as we go through this that there are an awful lot of perspectives. Robert Perry and Marianne Williamson are probably the two best known Course in Miracles appliers, if you want to say that, in terms of writing books about how to apply it in your life. I want to start with this concept right off the bat because it's probably one of the things that is going to help in comparing and contrasting the Cayce readings to A Course in Miracles. I will give you my biased opinion right off the bat. I was raised on the Edgar Cayce readings, and obviously since I'm older than 1976, I was well steeped in them before I ever was exposed to A Course in Miracles material. Now, the Course in Miracles is obviously known for the fact that everything that we experience in our day-to-day lives here on the earth is an illusion, a dream, that it is not reality. And what our whole goal is to be able to do away with that reality, set it aside, and recognize the God in everything, and finally release our consciousness from this illusion and only see the reality. What the Cayce readings would describe this, and we'll go into this in more detail later on, is that instead of it just being the world of spirit, that there are three ways to look at God's universe. You wind up having, if we want to say that steam, if we're going to look at water, that steam or spirit or a gaseous state is what we were in before the beginning, if you will, when we were, and God has always been pure consciousness. Now let's go ahead and project ourselves into materiality. Let's call it a ghost. Is a ghost in a physical body, like an ice cube over here? The answer is no. So it's more an ethereal body. And let's go ahead and talk about that in terms of the water being the mental, or the, it's starting to get into manifestation, so it's a liquid, but it's not quite into 3 dimensions yet. So you take the far one over there being the ice cube or the solid, and let's call the ice being the physical. Now, the one thing that's so important to figure out with all this is the same substance. Whereas Course in Miracles may talk about and say, this is not reality. Anything that's talking about in this manifest universe is not reality. It's an illusion. This is what the reality is. Then you wind up saying in the Cayce readings, all 3 of these things exist. However, this is the same stuff. This is water as steam, as liquid as solid. It's the same thing, and we need to be able to see the God in every part of the 3 dimensions that we're involved with. And I say 3 dimensions, I mean the solid, the liquid, the gas, being the spirit, mental, and physical. All right, so if we can, as long as you keep this concept in mind, many of the things that I'll be using to compare and contrast the spiritual, mental, and physical in this matter is going to help you to understand. All right, so let's start out with what is A Course in Miracles all about. I pulled this quote directly out of it and found a pretty picture to back it up. It's, I am the light of the world. That is my only function. That is why I am here. So we are here to be a light unto the world, but we are also supposed to be able to free our own minds from the illusion that we are encountering, and not only in our thoughts, but in our 5 senses, and we have to recognize it as being an illusion and get beyond that. And while we come to that greater clarity ourselves, at the same time, we are held here to help others with that as well. The Cayce readings would say we all get to heaven leaning on the arm of someone that we've helped. So there's a very similar look as far as why we are here and what we're doing. Now, I'm going to give you John Schroeder's definition of A Course in Miracles. I need for you to understand this is just my take on it again. The intention behind A Course in Miracles, and I use the ACIM abbreviation, is to suggest that we let go of all beliefs and concepts that are a part of our world of illusion. The Course readily admits that it too is an illusion that is intended to be a wake-up call. It should be the last of our illusory beliefs to be released. So in other words, the Course in Miracles is very clear that it is an illusion even from the start, that it too is guilty of what it's claiming everything else is. It's not saying we're the only thing that's not the illusion. It said, no, you're part of the manifest universe. Course in Miracles is an illusion as well, but it's the last thing to let go of before you finally come to the pure recognition of what God in reality is all about. So you have my definition after going through all this material of what it comes down to, all right? So now we're going to start going into the comparison of, these are largely the areas where the Cayce readings and the Course in Miracles agree. One of the things, Alvin in the back is famous, I don't think he sends an email out that doesn't say God equals love equals law. And in the Course in Miracles, forgiveness, salvation, atonement, true perception. If you were to put an equal sign between all of those, you would be able to nail what an ongoing, just like God equals love equals law in the Cayce readings, you put an equal sign between those, you have nailed A Course in Miracles, saying that these things are pretty much synonymous with each other. So that when we forgive, we are saved. And we come to at-one-ment, you can call it atonement, but at-one-ment works because we have a true perception of what we are all about, what our true nature is, as opposed to the illusion that we live by on a day-by-day basis. So you're going to see this header up here that is copied amongst a bunch of the slides here, and it's going to talk about where they agree. So both the Course and the Cayce readings agree on the ultimate outcome of humanity's experience in the earth. We are no longer entrapped here once we change our consciousness to sharing the perfect mind of God through atonement or at-one-ment. Jesus plays a very important role in how we accomplish this. Okay, I'm going to get a little deeper into the Jesus aspect of it here in a minute, but I wanted to be able to say there's no bad news here. Everybody is going to eventually make it. There's no eternal, irreversible hell that's out there that some of the other more traditional religions and theologies will talk about. And this is an interesting thing that you would think this, as a matter of fact, this slide did come from a traditional Christian website, but it really is, here's reality. This is the illusion over here, according to Course in Miracles, and that Jesus has a foot in both of those realms. Jesus, like us, was caught up in the illusion, and he was able to return completely to God. Be this guy that started over here and made it over here all on his own. Now he acts as a bridge to make it easier for all of us to be able to figure out how do we start in the illusion and come completely over to the reality. And Jesus is instrumental in our ability to do that. Yet another thing that the Course and the Cayce readings agree on. So the Course and the Cayce readings define the Son. If you remember, like in the Trinity, where you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Course in Miracles and Cayce readings define the Son as all souls created by God. Not just Jesus, but every one of us constitutes the Son collectively. So Jesus can be said to be our Savior because he keeps a foot in heaven and the other here on earth, and he offers himself as a means of escape for those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. The Cayce readings describe Jesus as providing the perfect role model for all time and all people. All right, so you can see where they're saying he's got a foot in each one. Listen to what Jesus has to say. And Cayce readings talking about Jesus being the perfect role model for which we would emulate all of his actions, choices, activities. I think we have a real close fit here between what the two define Jesus as being. This comes directly from A Course in Miracles. Projection makes perception. We look inside first, decide what kind of the world we want to see, and then project that world outside, making it the truth as we see it. So this is very similar to the Cayce readings as far as being able to say, whatever it is that we treasure inside, the values that we hold, the ethics that we set out there, you put all of that together, and if you look at everything out and around you with that filter, that's why the projection winds up affecting our perception. So when we have a preconceived notion and we look at something, we tend to have that filter cause us to evaluate whatever we see. Because I can go out there, and you've heard of this experiment before. If I were to say, all right, if I gave you a minute to look around in this room and check out everything that's green, and I'll give you 60 seconds to do that, and after the 60 seconds is over, you come back and I say, all right, now tell me where everything is that's red. Well, that isn't what you asked me to do. Well, guess what? That's exactly what life is like. You're out there looking for green stuff, and when the red was the thing that you should have been looking for in the beginning. So this is telling us that as long as we are clear with the kinds of filters that we apply and what we look at, we would be clear in our reality, and there wouldn't be an illusion. So this is an important point that is shared by the Cayce material and the Course in Miracles. Now, where some people have a real problem, and I would have to be one of them as well, and you go, boy, when you're first starting out with this stuff, what is it if I'm out there and I have a mirror of people that really make me mad? I don't like, a liberal or a conservative in political world. I don't like murderers. I don't like child molesters. And you wind up having the Course tell you that whatever I have as condemnation of judgment of people out there in front of me is mirroring some aspect within myself. And so the answer that kind of comes out of that is, you mean I'm a child molester at heart? I'm a murderer at heart? I'm a whatever the opposite, of your political party is at heart? And the answer is no, it's not like that at all. Cayce says that there really is only one sin. And actually, Course in Miracles too. We'll talk about it in a second. But there is only one sin in the Cayce material, and that's selfishness. Every single thing that we do that is out of accord or out of harmony with God is a selfish sin. It has its base in selfishness. So whether it would be, the 7 deadly sins or all the rest of that, you can figure out how it winds up being selfishness. But I'll give you an example. For instance, a child molester, psychologists who have, very little understanding of metaphysics or even approach things that way, have been very clear that it's usually not sex, that it has to do with control. And so I can see so many of us that would sit there and have a problem with a child molester. You'd say, how dare you go out there and take an innocent and try to manipulate or control them? When we may have that in and of ourselves, when we would say, I really wish I could make this politician do things like I want them to do. I mean, that's a subtle way of saying, what are our control issues? But that's certainly it doesn't mean that you have to be to the exact same manifestation or extent of the person, but at least there is enough of a mirror image in there to bring it to our attention. All right, so an important point where the Course and the readings agree, A Course in Miracles teaches you see the flesh or recognize the spirit. There is no compromise between the two. Now this T614 is kind of like a Cayce reading. If I said 262-15, that would be a Search for God reading, and it'd be the 15th reading from the Search for God books. This is telling you it's the text and the section 614, the way that they divide them up. So this is an exact quote out of A Course in Miracles. Now, the second one, to be able to find the points of agreement here, the Cayce readings say that the vilest act of humanity falls just under God's unconditional love. Because the real question was, how far below God's unconditional love does the vilest act of humanity stand? And they're expecting to get this huge, you can't imagine the depths of depravity that exists between this and this. Said it's just under. He said, how does that make any sense? Are you trying to tell me that cheating on my taxes or jaywalking is the same thing as murder or child molesters? And in a sense, yes, because everything is a sin, and you're either there in perfection or you're not. I wound up being able to make this clear in the following example right here. In fact, I showed this in a previous Edgar Cayce on talk, but I think it's so helpful to look at it that it's worth going through again. If you see these mathematical equations, you see we have 2 + 2 = 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now, take the left one out of the equation and tell me, is this one more wrong than that one? Or is this one more wrong than this one, and this one's much better than this one, but it's still not quite right? We might be all really upset and tied up in which one of these things is more right than the other, when this is all that we have God looking out for. God wants us to nail it, just like that. And he isn't going to stop loving us, helping us, giving us the opportunity in more math tests, to be able to figure out that 2 + 2 indeed does equal 4. It doesn't equal any of the rest of these, so don't get caught up in the rest of these. This is and you see it up there, the ideal. So here's one sin, a second sin, a third completely different sin. All of those are wrong. You need to nail it with the ideal right there. And this is very, very similar in another way of looking at the Course in Miracles, and it says everything is an illusion, isn't a dream. Here we are in the dream world over here on the right, and that is the only one that is truth. So if you're able to go ahead and look at everything that we have, whether it's the events, other people that we're working with, the thoughts that we have, we're trying to hit the ideal, the perfection that we were created in God's perfect image to have. And then you've got it. Okay, this is from Marianne Williamson. You're no doubt familiar with her. In fact, they had her here at Unity of Phoenix not too long ago. Ego says, once everything falls into place, I'll feel peace. But spirit, being the perfection, the perfect way to see things, find your peace, and then everything will fall into place. All right? Grok on that for a second. If you've ever read Stranger in a Strange Land, that term grok means to try to understand something in fullness, and it's complete fullness. So grok on that. This is really giving an introduction, if you will, because of that first word in there, ego. Now, if the ego is real, And of course, the Course says that the ego is just part of the illusion. If the ego is real, and we certainly do seem to have to deal with it, where did it come from? Anybody have an idea where the ego actually started? I mean, if we were created as perfect beings, where in the world does this imperfect, this illusory, this dream thing come from? And I want to say in the Cayce readings, it becomes very clear that it came through rebelliousness and through our selfish choices. And I'll get into a slide later on that clarifies that. But we started to make rebellious or selfish choices. All right, and here's a more practical way to be able to see the ego. When you take the spirit, our souls, and you bring them into a physical body, these physical bodies have instinctual reactions. And it's just the way that a body survives here on the earth. You hear that you are supposed, that we all have the self-preservation or survival. There are the basic hungers of the body in order to be able to, perpetuate the species and survive. Those things are happening, and that is a filter in our brain. Every time we get this information, we see something around there and we identify as it. Oh my God, is that going to kill me? Is that going to starve me? Is that going to, keep me from being able to raise a family and keep the species going? It's all this stuff, and you have this filter to be able to identify or evaluate everything you come into. To me, that's just a given. When you go into a physical body, that's going to happen with everything that occurs to you in your life. So basically being in human form causes that to come up right off. Now it gets worse and worse with every selfish choice we make. And that, let me go on to the next one and it'll be a little clearer. So we have the Course teaches that the ego, the illusory part of us we wrongly believe separates us from God, has one purpose: to perpetuate itself. It does this by seeming to offer whatever we believe we lack. That way, we don't look to God for our needs. Because the ego says, I won't exist if you find God. All right? Therefore, if the ego's egocentric around the idea of self-preservation, it has to keep you away from looking to God for your needs, and instead you have to go with the dream, the illusory reality, if you will, that says that the ego continues to survive. All right, that's the only way the ego can live, is by us staying away from making a pure connection with God. The Cayce readings more often call the ego self, using the small s, self, as opposed to the big S being, the companions and co-creators with God that Cayce says we were created to be. So saying that self is the part of us that makes choices as if it was separate from God. Now, obviously, the Cayce readings are clear that there is no separation and there is no lack in God. But when we start making decisions from that small s, that small self that is trying to survive, if you will, then it is not turning to God for the answers, and then you start to see the same thing that's being described up here. So I hope that makes it a little clearer, as far as now we're seeing it described in different ways, but it winds up getting to the same place. So back to the concept of projection and the ego. This is all coming from A Course in Miracles quotes right here. And you can just barely see that it's from the text, and it tells you how to be able to find those. The ego is the mind's belief that it is completely on its own. Sounds like an atheist to me. An atheist who has no belief in God is completely tied up in the ego because they think I'm it. And once I'm no longer alive in this body, I cease to exist. I mean, that's how alone an atheist believes they are. And then there are all the points in between when you have the other theologies and religions, etc. All right, so then you have the ego is your belief. The ego is a confusion in identification, because how many people have you run into in your life that identify, this is me? I can't tell you how many traditional Christians I've run into that said, God created the body first and then breathed the breath of life and it became a living soul, and that the soul comes into being with the physical body. Cayce is very clear on this and says that we have always been and will always be. Now, I'll take just a moment on that, because it says, if God created us, how can we have a beginning or have no beginning? You have to have had a beginning if God created us. And so I didn't put it in here as far as the video, but go back to life science and think of having an egg, and the sperm comes in and creates a zygote. All right, so now you have this single cell that, let's call that God before the beginning. And then the single cell divides into two identical cells, and then 4 and 8, 16, 32, 64, it keeps going. Now it gets too many to count, goes into infinity, and you look at that zygote divided in an infinite number of cells and say, which one of those is the oldest? Now, when you look at it from that perspective, you're going, if God took God and divided God's consciousness into an infinite number of souls, and Cayce calls that being single cells in the body of God. We are corpuscles in the body of God, is essentially what the Cayce readings say. And if all of those cells were made to be identical, how can you say that one of them existed before another? So in consciousness, we have always been and will always be. And the rest of it is, in fact, temporary, because Cayce also says that which has a beginning also has an end. The manifest universe hasn't always been here. It was created by God, Big Bang. We'll get into that in a little bit too, and say that there's a Big Bang and that will also come to an end as well. And it could start all over again with the next Big Bang. Now, we have allegiance to the denial of God is the ego's religion. So the more that you can stay away from God, the more you're staying away from the truth, the longer the ego gets to live. Now, both Course in Miracles and the Cayce readings are very clear on the ego is not going to stick around forever. There is a happy ending for all of us out there, and it's up to each one of us how long it takes us in order to be able to come to that realization. Okay, so we have the Cayce readings say that the conscious mind, what the Course calls the ego, is operating at our most limited level of awareness. So you have the superconscious, the subconscious, and the conscious mind. The conscious mind is the lowest level, has the least access to godlike information. And that is indeed what the Course calls the ego. So you have the Cayce readings describe the subconscious mind as a storehouse of patterns and tendencies. In other words, and I'll talk about reincarnation later, but all of the choices that we've made in past lives come forward into this current life, and those are our patterns and tendencies. You ever walk into a room crowded full of people and you go, I like them, never met them before, but I like them already, and that person over there I got a problem with, and I'm not sure why. There's your patterns and your tendencies. You can do that with places you drive through, a place that you go visit. You can go over to Europe and go, wow, I really like it here, or I hate that place. And you're going, if you've been there, you've been there. It's kind of a way to be able to discuss in terms of reincarnation. You've probably had a past life there, and those tendencies, those patterns are emerging again through your subconscious into the conscious mind. All right, so the Course seems to call those patterns and tendencies projections. I don't know if that helps to be able to define what projections are all about, but if we look at it from a Cayce perspective, that helped me to be able to identify that much better. The one thing that I think is so important to, and I don't really like that I don't hear enough definition of these words. There's always a negative connotation to the word judgment. And rightly so, because the way we like to be able to define the word judgment is judge not lest ye be judged. And I would love to change that. The judgment isn't a bad word. Condemnation is a bad word. That you condemn not, that you be not condemned. And the reason I say that is when you come up to a light and the light is green, but it turns yellow, don't you need to make a pretty quick judgment right about there without passing any condemnation onto that signal going, oh, damn it. You have to make judgments on a regular basis all the time, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with making a judgment. It is putting that whatever it is down for whatever they've said, whatever they've done, however they've been, hindered or impeded your life. That's where you wind up having the problem, where you wind up condemning a person, a place, or a thing, or an action, a thought. Any of that winds up being where you have the difference between condemnation and judgment. So we need to have discernment to decide what is a choice that we need to make, and what is something that we should not be thinking badly about another person. Okay, here's another quote from the Course. If the mind can heal the body, but the body can't heal the mind, then the mind must be stronger than the body. All right, so what we're going to get into in the Course here is very clear about, remember those things that are equal. The love equals God equals law. And so we're going to talk about how healing is very connected to forgiveness. And our ability to exist in perfection in heaven is very much tied up in forgiveness. So here we go. This is again where we agree. The main purpose of the Course is to teach us to forgive ourselves. The irony is that we must learn to forgive, and heal I put in there as well, forgive or heal ourselves for an act that was not possible in the first place. That is, that we were trying to separate ourselves from God. We cannot separate ourselves from God. We can wind up in our mind feeling like we're separated from God, but remember my analogy of saying the zygote with the infinite number of cells all divided in between there? Do you think any of them are really separated from God, even if they say they are? It's impossible. And so that's the illusion, if you will, from A Course in Miracles. Now, the readings suggest that heaven is a state of mind. We can choose to live in heaven no matter where we are. Religions teach specific tenets, and they say, if you follow the tenets in our religion, someday you're going to be able to leave the earth and go to this wonderful place where you are not going to suffer as you do here. The Cayce readings are very clear. It says, you can find heaven right here. Do you think Jesus was not in heaven here on earth? I mean, Jesus could have gone on and done whatever he wanted to do, but he decided to come back and be his brother's keeper, to be our perfect role model. You think he wasn't happy as he could possibly be to be able to come back here and offer his role model, his sacrifice, his service to us in order that we too could be where he is? He even said that. I go so prepare a place for you so that where I go, you can come with me, right? That was all part of John 14. So you have this great agreement, and this is all tied up in forgiveness, and that's how we heal ourselves. And the way that the Cayce readings are talking about healing ourselves is the idea that it's a state of mind. Both of them are saying once you have the Christ consciousness embedded in your brain, you now understand reality, and the illusion is no longer an impediment to you. Seek not to change the world, but to change your mind about the world. This is really important because there are going to be a number of things. In fact, most of them will come after the break. But there are going to be a number of things in which I'm able to show that the Course, it isn't that they disagree with it. I'll give you an example right now. Reincarnation. The Course doesn't really talk about reincarnation. And the reason it doesn't talk about reincarnation is not because if you talk to most people that are involved in A Course in Miracles, they'll go, reincarnation exists, but it's part of the illusion. It's part of the rabbit hole. If you start studying reincarnation, aren't you just getting deeper into the dream, into the illusion? Why would you go ahead and try to do that when you need to free your mind from the things that are part of the illusion, all right? So we don't need to change the world and decide whether reincarnation is real or not, but we need to change our mind about the world to say, all of this is not what I need to focus on. What I need to focus on is the unconditional love of God and the way Jesus showed us how to live. And that very much sums that entire thing up. So changing our mind about how the world is and how we are is the way to be able to set ourselves free. Another point of agreement is that the Course describes the body as the ego's friend, because we use it to hide our hatred, shame, guilt, and fear that encourages us to manipulate others. Not only is this insidious, it's really complex. If you sit there and look, if you read that sentence and you start thinking, my God, all the implications of this, the body itself, I mean, isn't this what we use to be able to communicate here in 3 dimensions in the illusion? So we are using our 5 senses as input. We're using the body to be able to communicate our thoughts that wind up through hatred, shame, guilt, fear, that we wind up manipulating others. Now, how do we manipulate others? It's really subtle. I mean, don't we try to keep up with the Joneses? Or don't we, if you listen to a televangelist, doesn't he try to guilt you into giving him more money? you see these things that even in the best of circumstances can wind up being looked at as a manipulation to others, and for all the wrong reasons. Well, the readings suggest that as a man thinketh, so too does he become. So it behooves us to think only the best of others, of life, and of ourselves. That's the best good health advice. Because up here, the Course is always talking about how we need to forgive ourselves for all of these sins that come in order to be able to heal ourselves in body, mind, and spirit. And the Cayce readings are saying the best health advice at all is to be able to think nothing but kind, loving thoughts, and to be of service to other people in order to keep the body and the mind and the spirit all in harmony with each other. Okay, now we're getting into areas that are not necessarily, these are kind of, okay, the Course is not very specific on it, but there are some shared concepts here. In karma, there's a fear base. It says, all the bad stuff that you do, you get right back at you. But there can be love-based, that karma is a gift that brings you lessons for your soul's personal growth. In other words, if a terrible thing is happening to you, rejoice. Because the only reason it's happening to you is because apparently you're ready to be able to grow from it. You have this terrible thing happening, and you're going, but I wouldn't be getting that unless I was ready to be able to take on this lesson and learn from it. So these are the two ways of looking at karma. Now, the interesting thing is that karma is, if we were to start getting involved in that, and that kind of goes into reincarnation as well, is another way to get enmeshed in the illusion of the manifest universe, of these human lies that we're living right here. The Cayce reading suggests that no matter what bothersome thing that is happening to us, we can learn from it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be bothering us. So this is, to me, it's very helpful to be able to have terrible things happen to me out there and rejoice. If you're going to, how can you rejoice when terrible things happen? Because you say, this is a wonderful, the outcome of this is going to be even better, right? Whereas the Course would say, don't start studying karma because it can get you down that rabbit hole even further. You always want to do away with the illusion and stay focused on God. We have, the Course does not teach the law of karma, but it does teach something similar. It says we perpetuate the past through a lack of forgiveness. The holiest spots on earth are when ancient hatreds have become places of love. Now, you can probably think of examples of that in your own life in which, boy, I remember that, perhaps it was in a relationship and you remember you went to this place and you had a terrible fight with your spouse, and yet you were able to come to a greater understanding with them as you worked through it cooperatively together in impatience. So I think that's a really good example of what they're talking about here. And where do you get to that point? It's because of a lack of forgiveness is what started you down on the bad karma or negative karma, if you will. Now, the Cayce reading suggests that when we make better, more loving choices, we emulate the mind of Christ and step closer to achieving perfection. So, replacing thoughts of fear and selfishness with love is exactly what Jesus taught us to do. I don't see a great deal of difference here, but you don't see karma being specifically taught in A Course of Miracles. A Course of Miracles. So when I try to put these side by side from my evaluation of what I've seen there, I think they're not so far apart from each other, even though Course of Miracles doesn't necessarily use the word karma when it's talking about it. All right, here's another one. Benefits of meditation. There's, they've got, 8 of them up here where it's talking about it can reduce pain and feelings of depression, and blood flow improves with it, and you have a inner sense of calm and peace, and that, I don't need to go through the whole list, but all of these are considered benefits of meditation even by secular scientists who have seen people go in and meditate and have these kind of results with it. Meditation is not taught per se in A Course in Miracles. It does not say, like the Cayce readings are, they say, what's the best way to meditate? The Cayce readings say, the one that you'll do daily. You have all of these ways to be able to meditate, but I don't care which one you do. The one that you will do daily is the one that you really need to key into. Because is one better than another? If you'll do it daily, it is. So you see where the readings are very flexible when it comes to something like that. Now, Course does not specifically teach it, but what does this sound like to you? Here's a quote, and it's out of the workbook side of the thing. Be still and lay aside all thoughts of what you are and what God is. Forget this world, forget this course, and come with wholly open hands unto your God. Be still and lay aside all thoughts. What does that sound like to you? If that isn't meditation, I don't know what is. And yet the word meditation is avoided because it's like the word God. You use the word God and suddenly there's this whole plethora of definitions and baggage that goes along with that for so many people. I think Course in Miracles very often doesn't use words like reincarnation, meditation, dreams, karma. All of that is not in the vocabulary of A Course in Miracles because that's down the rabbit hole again. You start doing that, and the next thing is all the definitions that go with those subjects takes you deeper and deeper into the illusion. The readings suggest that the clarity we seek, a direct connection with the divine within each of us, is achieved through meditation. Meditation and prayer are key in our prodigal children's return to our Father. All right, Cayce couldn't have been clearer as far as the necessity for regular prayer and meditation in our lives. Prayer is talking to God, meditation is listening to God. That is the very quick, simple, down and dirty definition from the readings as far as what the difference is between the two. So when I see this, I'm going, this is too similar to ignore without having, without pointing it out side by side. Now, what do we have to say about holy texts? The Bhagavad Gita, the Holy Bible. This is the Holy Quran and the Talmud for the Jews. So I put 4 of them up there to say, here are the holy texts. And Cayce was constantly quoting that one because he read the King James Version of the Bible more times than years he was alive on earth. So if he was in his 60s, he was when he died, he wound up reading the Bible more than that many times in his life. Now, Cayce was very big on the holy text. He wasn't even against the others. He was just saying, kind of like meditation, be whatever religion you want to be and let the readings allow you to be a better Muslim, a better Jew, a better Hindu, a better Christian. That's what the Cayce material was supposed to do, was to help you take the thing that you already resonate to and get even better as a result of it by taking this information and applying the readings within it. So, A Course in Miracles does not rely on the Bible or other holy texts as a source of information. This is because the Bible was written, translated by humans with the same ego minds we all have, which are not deemed a reliable source of the truth. I will say that I love A Course in Miracles for its consistency. It is so consistent in being able to say, here is this straight and narrow path that Jesus talked about, and don't get confused with that guy behind the curtain. Don't get confused with these other things that are out there. It's not that there isn't some truth in all of that, but if you stay with this straight and narrow path, you're going to get there. And that's why I really give them, a round of applause for being able to pull that one off. The reading suggests that the Bible is an excellent historical account of humankind's growing understanding of the unconditional love of God. From that perspective, we should never have stopped adding books to the Bible. And you have the book of Revelation, you change one word and you've eternally damned yourself. And who knows whether it's talking about the book of Revelation or the entire 66 books of the Bible. But that is really in the book of Revelation, and it caused a lot of Christianity to say, we're not changing a word or adding a word to this ever. All right, so if we understand that it is just, if you start there in the early days of the Old Testament, and it was saying, Moses, take your chosen people, go down there and kill everybody, take their assets, rape the women, it was saying like this information was coming from God. No, it wasn't. All right, we know it wasn't. It was Moses misinterpreting what he was hearing. And so what you wind up having from there is you move to about the middle or just toward the end of the Old Testament, and you have the Psalms. And the Psalms are beautiful. as far as the kind of image that they give you of our relationship to God. And by the time Jesus comes around, it is a very different God than was talked about in the beginning. This one makes a lot of sense to me. Up here, I think the Course is so consistent in being able to say, you know what, I'm not going to try to give you a commentary on the Bible and say this is really close to the truth, and I can't believe how far away this section of the Bible is away from the truth. All it says is, you know what, get away from that altogether and focus on being able to, see the reality that is beyond the illusion here. Okay, picking up. This is as close as I could figure out how to pull a picture off of the internet that would be representative of the Big Bang. Because now I'm coming into things in the Course in Miracles and the Cayce readings. We went through the points of agreement. We had the things that seemed to be very similar. And now we're going to go ahead and contrast and see where we don't necessarily come together on these points and still finding the points of agreement in it. So let's talk about creation. And the Course teaches that God did not create the universe, as in the manifest universe, earth, or anything temporal, any part of the manifest universe. God only created that which is true and real, for those things are changeless and eternal. Okay? So this universe that we see was not God's creation. This is something that is a dream. It's not even really a creation, if you will, because it's a dream, it's an illusion. Now here's where the Cayce readings come in quite differently. It says the readings believes that we were created to be companions and co-creators with God. Part of God's creation was that the manifest universe we currently call home, God never intended that we reside here in physical bodies, but that is what we chose to do. So God never interferes with our free will. So if we were companions and co-creators with God, and God says, and I'm going to give you an analogy here. God says, I'm going to create Disneyland. All right? I'm going to have Disneyland. Let's go ahead and create this place where all of us, not just God, but my companions and co-creators, the other souls that are live and move and have our very being within the mind of God, let's create this manifest universe. It's like Disneyland, that all of us can be a part of creating this wonderful place to be able to go and experience all kinds of a manifest life out there. Now I'm back to that thing I gave you in the beginning. Started in spirit as steam, then all of a sudden we're out there in our mental world. We are like architects that are putting paper designs together of buildings, Disneyland, the universe, and then it comes into manifestation in the physical, as ice, if you will, in a physical manifestation. It's still the water of life. When you go from steam to water to ice, it's still the water of life, but it's happening on all levels at the same time. So that's the difference between them. We're saying that in the Course, saying that God didn't create the universe. In the Cayce readings, we're saying God and all of us are part of the creation that we see in front of us. We weren't supposed to get caught up in it. We weren't supposed to be enmeshed in it. We have created an illusion that is very difficult to escape from, because how many people do you run into and say, this body is me? And they're absolutely wrong about that. It is an illusion. But if you're a soul who said, my wife and I, we love dogs. And I'll give you one that has to, in the Cayce readings, they were talking about a woman who seemed to just, they talk about a horse whisperer. If you've heard that concept, said this woman had an amazing touch with horses, to be able to be an empath and see where they were hurting, and to be able to take a difficult horse and be able to work out whatever the problems were. And Cayce said, you were part of the soul grouping that invented, if you will, the equestrian species. Was part Stephanie and I love dogs. I really want to meet the soul grouping that created dogs. What a loving, set of just a group soul right there of dogs that are so unconditionally loving and wonderful and so full of joy. And this woman was doing it with horses. This is where you can go in, and that's part of the companions and co-creators that Cayce talks about. And we were intended to do that, where we intended to become the horse, where we intended to get ourselves caught up in these bodies so we forget our true nature. That's where we went astray. But God never, ever interferes with our free will. If we decide we're going to go that way, he will forever provide a way out of the temptations that we create for ourselves. But it is, in fact, a real experience that has a beginning and therefore will have an end. All right, so and the agreement here is that it is temporal, and that anything temporal that's beginning has an end, doesn't last forever, so therefore it's not any more real than the Course in Miracles is talking about. So there are points of agreement, even if we can differ in something like the creation. Now we talk about the Course in Miracles and the Cayce reading stand on, like, say, original sin or the story of Adam and Eve being thrown out of the Garden of Eden. I would love the Course in Miracles take on this. It's really quite enlightening. The Course teaches that the concept of the fall of humanity is our shared, mistaken belief that we are capable of separating ourselves from God. I think in a little bit, I'm going to go in there and even identify in another quote from the Course that what we did is decide that God was trying to withhold something from us, and therefore we wrongly believe that we can usurp the power of God. And that's where this fall of humanity had taken place. All right, so the Cayce reading suggests that we were all created in God's perfect image. However, we rebelled against God's loving ways through our selfish choices, even before there was a manifest universe. So Cayce says there wasn't this whole Disneyland of a manifest universe out there when we began to make selfish, rebellious choices. All right? So while we are never separated from God, we were given the free will to ignore our Creator. And I would say we're using a different vocabulary here, but both of these are saying we never can be disconnected from God, but we sure can't ignore God if we so choose to use our free will in that direction. Okay? Now, we come to this thing about the past, the present, or the future. Was it just last month? No, 2 months ago, I did a talk on Edgar Cayce. And believe me, I think Edgar Cayce is a real fan of A Course in Miracles, although he never mentions it. And this is one of the reasons why, because he says present moment. Everything about the Course is saying you focus on the present moment. Don't worry about that man behind the curtain in the past or the man behind the curtain in the future. Present moment is where everything is forgiven, everything is healed, and the focus needs to be there. Like I said, I am so impressed with the Course's ability to so consistently stay with guidance that really will get you there eventually. So here's where they wind up being somewhat different. The Course teaches that we can only let go of our illusions in the present. Therefore, we should ignore things of the past and the future so that we can stay focused on the truth. Now, the reading suggests that it is as important to know where we have been as it is to know where we're going. The past, present, and future are all one. As humans, this is a difficult thing to understand, but the Cayce readings indicate that it is clear when we share the mind of Christ. How, when you hear there is no time or space, you've probably heard that statement before, and understand that in eternity, everything is happening to us at once. All right, time is God's way of keeping everything from happening to us at once here in the earth. Thank goodness. It's really hard to ferret through everything if you don't have time separating all those events for you. And that's one of the advantages of being here on the earth, to be able to, get the clarity of cause and effect of the choices we make. So again, I think Course in Miracles, when we're talking about this particular subject, is trying to make sure that we do not get caught up in the illusion. And the Cayce readings are saying the fact is that past, present, and future are all one. It's not an illusion. It's just a different way of seeing the same thing. Steam, water, ice. You with me? As far as steam, water, ice are all one, whereas what the Course would be saying is focus on the water, because that will get you to the reality faster than getting down the rabbit hole with the past and the future. And so staying focused like that, I think, is really an important way to go. Now we talk about reincarnation. I've mentioned that before, but we're going to get into it specifically here. Since the Course de-emphasizes the past or future, the concept of reincarnation is not studied because it encourages a deeper and deliberate acceptance of our illusory world. Note that reincarnation appears to be a fact in ACIM, but it is still an illusion that distracts us. Now, the Cayce readings offered over 2,500 past life readings where events of the seeker's past lives were given to explain their challenges in the present lifetime. Most found this information to be helpful in releasing the fear, guilt, anger, and shame associated with the present conditions. You have to admit it's really compelling. If you're wondering, how did I wind up with the parents, with the sibling, with the spouse, you're going, what in the world was I thinking? You know, when I brought these present conditions about, if you get tied up in reincarnation and you get tied up in thinking about things in the past, or what is it going to be in the future? It can be just as compelling for a lot of people. You know, how many folks do you know that, boy, with Cayce are going, it always gets me when I'll go onto YouTube videos and they'll say, and here's Cayce's predictions for the year 2020. I'm going, there are no Cayce predictions for the year 2020, but it'll probably get people to click on that video and start watching their stuff and buy their products or whatever it is they're doing. So it certainly is a compelling thing to look to the future and say, I know what's going to happen. Anytime somebody is prognosticating or forecasting what things are going to go on, people pay attention no matter how ridiculous it might wind up being. Okay, so if we wind up having 2,500 past life readings that are given, and it explains to you what how things are today and where they came from in the past, I'll give you an example from my own. And obviously I'm too young to have had a Cayce reading, but I had a reading that was given to me for two people that I was in business with. One was a business partner and the other was a general manager for a business that I was involved with. I had a lot of problems with them being able to, they were not really self-employed individuals. If you were to tell them, do this, and they would go do it, they were extremely successful. But if you said, you know, here's a list of things to get done this month, you get to the end of the month and not one of them would be done. And you say, well, do this. And then they go do that, and you think they're back on track again until you leave them to their own devices. So I started, I asked in a past life reading from another psychic that I respected, what was going on. And they said, you have had this pattern with these two for a long time, going all the way back to Atlantis, is when those lifetimes started, in which I was owner of a business and I'd bring them in and they would not perform well. And said, and so you really do, need to take things where they are right now. In other words, saying I should fire them. And dissociate from the partner and fire the one that works for me. And I had already done that. It took me, I was on an 8-month waiting list to get a reading from this person. I'd already disconnected from both of them by the time I got the information back. But here was the thing that was fascinating. It said, but there was the experience when you were not in the same family. These two were cousins in the same family, and you were not a part of the family when you were centuries ago in India. And that they took me in, I was destitute, and they cared for me for the rest of my life. And there was the reason why inside of me, even though I know this is the right thing to do, that I felt torn and I kept wanting to give them another chance, even if they were messing up. And that, by the way, helped me to be able to release the entire thing and to see them in a different light. By the way, both of them went out to, after I disconnected from them, both of them went on to do really well in things where people told them what to do every day. And they excelled in that environment. So being self-employed was not really a good fit for them, and it worked out to be better in the long run. So I give that as an example of where there is a common point as far as what they're both trying to accomplish here, even if it looks very different. All healing is essentially a release from fear. I've touched on this in the past, but healing is and forgiveness is such a big part of the Course in Miracles, I'll touch on it again. So the Course teaches that healing and atonement, or at-one-ment, are the same thing. If we desire to be healed, forgiving others and ourselves is a requirement. Forgiveness is a way of releasing the illusions we make, and those are the sources of all illness. So, when we wind up condemning others and when we wind up buying into the illusion, we are also allowing a buy-in to the body not being in a healthful condition. That's the Course in Miracles perspective. The Cayce reading suggests that healing comes in many forms. Healing the mind is a sure way to heal the body. But some people have a castor oil consciousness. That's actually a quote from the readings, while others believe surgery will heal them. The Cayce readings indicate that both can work depending on our individual beliefs. Most of you have heard my awful story about being raised in a Cayce family, and I talk about castor oil consciousness. And of course, my mother, coming from the Depression, never wanted to waste anything. And she was also a believer in efficiency. So what she would do is she would pour a bottle of castor oil into a big broiler pan, and to this day I can still remember opening the refrigerator door, and there on the bottom shelf is the broiler pan full of castor oil and a 3-layer flannel pack, if you will, that you were supposed to lay on the afflicted parts of the body to be able to heal you, and you put a heating pad on top of that. I'm 8 when I get the first one. You slap a, 38-degree, 3 layers of flannel-soaked castor oil pack on the afflicted area of the body, and she goes, oh, suck it up, here comes the heating pad. That was the most intense minute of my life, and I'm 8, so I hate this. Well, guess what? How much does a castor oil pack do for me? I've got this connection in my mind of that is the most objectionable thing I can think of, and let's try to get healed with it. Not going to happen. And the Course in Miracles would tell you the same thing, right? That it's an illusion to begin with, but this is really not a good illusion when you've got the idea this is awful. All right, so I don't have a castor oil consciousness. By the way, where that statement came from was Hugh Lynn Cayce was doing a reading for somebody, and I don't remember exactly what the problem was, but let's say that it had to do with scar tissue in the abdomen area. And all of the things that Cayce recommended were, Hugh Lynn's getting all these notes down, and a standard one for that is a castor oil pack. And Hugh Lynn said to his dad in the altered state, he goes, and castor oil packs? Edgar Cayce backed up and said, this individual does not have a castor oil consciousness. In other words, he won't believe in the woo-woo magic that castor oil would be able to heal you. Maybe because his mom kept that thing in the bottom shelf of the refrigerator. I don't know. So it is what it is. But you can see why there's not so much of a difference right there in its essence. You see how I can find the points of agreement in there, and yet on the surface, when you look at it, it seems to be very different. So a Course in Miracles teaches that fear began when we ejected God from our Garden of Eden. I mentioned this before, but let's go into the verbiage. Souls who did so, ejected God, believed that their Creator was withholding something from them. So fear then is defined as a basic yet wrong belief in our ability to usurp the power of God. So in other words, we don't trust God. Believe me, that's a really bad foundation to start with, right? So you don't trust God, and you wind up saying, God's withholding something from me, and I'm going to go find out what that is. Now, isn't that what one of the 10 Commandments, verse 1, that says, thou shalt have no other gods before me? So you're looking at that. The God before you would be a belief that God was withholding something from us. And so you can really see how the Bible actually covers something that's talked about here in the Course in Miracles. And even though the Course in Miracles would say the Bible is not helpful because it sends you down the wrong path, there are some truths that can come out of there, because that really very aptly describes what's going on in this case. And the Cayce readings suggest that our first sin made it easier to commit the second one, and so on. So the fear and guilt that we feel when we make selfish choices also disconnects our awareness from the mind of God. And we leave God rather than God leaving us. Remember that after Adam, ate of the forbidden tree, ate the fruit of the forbidden tree, then he ran off and hid. He's saying, I can hide from God. Yeah, right. Don't know how you come to that conclusion, but you start to try to do it. And the reason that he could come to that conclusion is he's so tied up in the fear, he wants to do something that will protect himself. Remember, he's now developed the ego that has to survive. And he says, how can I survive? I'll hide from God. Well, you can't do that. Well, I don't have the clarity of thought to think that I'll be able to, get away with this, but it doesn't keep me from trying to do it. It makes no logical sense, the things that we wind up doing on this earth. I'm sure God is just shaking God's head all the time going, wow, really? But that winds up having, the awareness gets further and further away. Now, one of the things that I think is really good about this is now that we have really disconnected ourselves from God to the point where we're in these three-dimensional bodies, could you imagine if we still had access to the power to create and destroy galaxies? Think about that for a moment. There is a direct relationship between the separation that we allow to take place between our consciousness connecting with God and the amount of power or damage that we can do to God's creation. And so here we are on this earth right now, and can we blow this planet up? Yep, but that's pretty much what the extent of the damage we can do right now is. So we don't get to leave this planet and go bother anybody else until we have the awareness that we should not do that, right? So that's why we remain enmeshed here in three dimensions. Okay, let's talk about dreams next, because this is yet another thing where the readings and the Course in Miracles seem to disagree, and here's why. The Course does not assign much value to dreams. Like a study of reincarnation, studying our dreams lures us ever deeper into the illusion that is the manifest universe. Now, the Cayce readings say that nothing of importance happens to us that is not foreshadowed in a dream. So, dreams are a priceless guidance that come to us as a message passed from our higher consciousness, our higher mind's experience while we're asleep, and it comes down into our conscious mind through the symbology of our dreams. So that you wind up saying, all right, every night, Cayce says that our souls literally, like in the REM sleep, when the eyes dart back and forth, during the REM sleep is when the soul actually leaves the body and literally goes almost into like school in other realms and other dimensions, and is able to go ahead and get almost like a counseling session or feedback from our higher mind, is able to work, maybe in a study group or therapy or whatever, to be able to bring that information back in of how to be able to deal with it. And this is what dreams are supposed to be, is that if we will work with our dreams and the symbology in it, nothing of importance happens to us that isn't foreshadowed in a dream. Nothing's of importance is going to get by us without us being prepared. You may not know specifically what it's going to be, but you could know that, I may have a health challenge, I may lose my job, somebody may die, I may have a real issue with a spouse or something like that comes to us in a dream ahead of time. So again, Course in Miracles is really down that straight and narrow that says dreams are just as easy to get you to go down the rabbit hole and lose yourself in the illusion of dreams and interpreting them, whereas Cayce is saying if you see dreams for what they are and try to interpret them in a way that takes you toward the truth, toward reality, toward getting away from the illusion and seeing things for how they really are, then dreams are okay. You can see there's a lot of flexibility around here that can definitely get you in the kind of trouble that they're trying to keep you away from. So there isn't an us and them. They're both saying the same thing. They're approaching it in a very different way. I love that picture. But what I like about this is that we're almost talking about, here's the spirit, and in the fire we're talking about the mental, and the ice and the physical right there. When I first saw that, I went, wow, it looks like I've got all three of the things happening right there. But right now I'm going to be talking about the second coming, or the millennium, and as Christ returning to the earth. Course in Miracles teaches that the second coming of Christ means the end of the ego's rule and the healing of the mind. It is not the events given in the Bible. It is the true healing we experience when we release the ego and accept the truth God always offers. Okay, so it's not like the serpent's going to appear and grab a third of the stars in the sky and hurl them at the earth, and we're going to, all the stuff that you see in the book of Revelation, saying it's not all of the things you're seeing there. It's really symbolic of the fact that the ego's rule is going to finally end, and that we will have a healing of the mind and become one with God. All right. The Cayce reading suggests that Christ will indeed come again to the earth, but only when humanity is ready to accept what Jesus has to offer. As to when that's going to happen, no one knows the day or the hour except God, as was given in the Bible. So if you're not familiar with the Cayce readings, you may have heard of the Essenes, which was a specific sect of the Jewish community that really prepared the way. As a matter of fact, they were a very close-knit sect of the Jewish community that protected Jesus, Mary, and Joseph so that he could grow and be able to stay away from, the Romans and the king at the time who was trying to have him killed. You needed to have that community together to be able to make sure that this baby that can't, defend itself yet was able to grow and learn, and traveled through Egypt, into Turkey, over into India, according to the Cayce readings, and learned all of that stuff before he came back at the age of 30 to be able to begin his ministry as Jesus who became the Christ. But you needed to have that entire infrastructure there in order for Jesus to be able to become the Christ in that case. Now, in the idea of today, Cayce is saying the same thing. Jesus is not going to return to the earth until we're ready for him, until we want him, until we will welcome Jesus with open arms. Because remember, when he comes back in the Bible and in the Cayce reading, it says when he comes back, people are really going to accept him. That he will be seen as being the Messiah that draws all of the religions together. So whether it's Jews, whether it's Islam, Hindus, Christians, it won't matter. Jesus will come back and be a unifying role model, if you will, for all of the religions, but that isn't going to be today, is it? No one knows the day or the hour, and that's we don't know what the future date when that will happen, but Cayce says it's inevitable. Now here's a wide topic, but I have it, from A to Z, or angels to Zen. We're talking about things like mystical experiences, or angels, or I think they were called, a lot of places, even Cayce referred to guides, which are like angels on the other side, but they're souls who act as a guide to us who are living here on the earth. Elementals, in fact, I talked about that just last month, as far, little things like fairies and gnomes and that sort of thing, elementals as well. And also, even psychic abilities. Now, the course is not really big on all of the things I said until I get to psychic abilities. And there's actually, I think, quite a bit on. I didn't even cover it all. I was surprised that there was so much that was covered in psychic abilities in the teaching handbook or workbook. So let's see what it says. A Course in Miracles largely ignores the different levels of consciousness, heavenly beings like angels or guides, and mystical experiences. These are likely seen. I didn't get a description because now we're trying to prove a negative, right? I'm talking about why aren't these things in the Course in Miracles. That's why I hedge it a little bit and say these are likely seen to be distracting rather than enhancing our perspective of the truth. However, the teacher's manual does talk about psychic powers in a very positive light. So as far as the ability to manifest psychic abilities, apparently the closer that we get to the truth, there is a direct correlation to our psychic abilities and how much of the truth we can see. I guess that a lot of that would be supported by the fact that Helen Schuckman was able to go ahead and translate or take down word for word what she was hearing to create the Course in Miracles text. So the Cayce readings say that psychic abilities are an attribute of the soul. It's actually a part of the soul. It's like this arm is a part of my body. This foot is a part of my body. Psychic abilities are just a natural part of the soul. So beings like angels, elementals, guides, fairies, and gnomes are all part of God's magnificent creation. So even if these things that I'm talking about right here are ignored in the Course in Miracles, Cayce does talk about them, and he says it's just like dogs, just like cats. These are other creations that are part of God's infinite universe that are all seen as one. They are God's creation. Okay? So our mystical experiences with them, with those kinds of beings there, can serve to enhance our belief in God and His promises of an eternal life. All right? So it's what are those programs, Long Island Medium, or have you heard of that newer one that's called Mama Medium? I forget the one that was down in San Diego. She was only on for a season. Yeah, Monica the Medium, John Edward crossing over. I mean, I'm mentioning all these TV shows that have people that are able to connect with folks on the other side and to be able to offer comfort and confidence that life does continue on the other side. I think as much as we can sit there and go, I don't believe in all this stuff in front of me, it's very helpful to hear that. At least it is for me to be able to say, all this stuff I believe in is actually having some kind of proof of, when you talk to these people and they're able to tell you things about your deceased relatives that they wouldn't otherwise know. So it's very consoling and it's very supportive of what you already believe. The bottom line for both A Course in Miracles and the Edgar Cayce readings is that a happy outcome to all things is assured. All right? There isn't any of us that are going to get left behind. And the Bible actually says God is unwilling to lose even one soul. The Cayce readings actually expand on that. God is not only unwilling to lose even one soul, neither does he want you to be sad or discouraged. All right? So we sit there and we think of all the things that we go through on a day-to-day basis and go, there's so much suffering, and going, it is not God's will that we are even sad or discouraged. It's not even just the idea of losing one's soul, because that's pretty important, especially to the soul that's lost. But the idea that we shouldn't even be sad or discouraged says this is what God's will is. And so the only thing that's standing between us and being one with God is right here. We can just look in the mirror and see what that is. All right, so we're going to get John Schroeder's synopsis of A Course in Miracles. I touched on this earlier, but let's go back. I spent 15 years in the Army Reserve, and I went through basic training in officer candidate school, and I watched people who were misfits in civilian life thrive in a military environment. Why? Because they had a very clear set of guidelines to live their life by. The same is true of many religions. A Course in Miracles offers a very concise way to view life and its circumstances. The flexibility of the Edgar Cayce readings is a double-edged sword when it comes to setting rules to live by. Some people consider the flexibility offered in the Cayce readings to be indicative that the information is entry-level metaphysics. I find the opposite to be true after a lifetime of studying the Cayce readings. All right, I've touched on it before, but I am so impressed with let's just head forward in this way. And it is in such greater depth than, say, a traditional Christian who comes back and says, all you've got to do is accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior and everything else is taken care of. I know we don't answer all those questions here on earth, but rest assured that everything that happens in this earth is happening for the greater glory of God. They have simplified it better than anyone else I know. Course in Miracles goes far deeper than that, but it's still, don't worry about the past, don't worry about the future, don't worry about dreams, don't worry about all of these other things that can distract you from focusing on getting to the truth of God. And it's really hard to say any more than I was talking about General George Patton or Mother Teresa, which one works. It's the one that you will work on daily. So there's not one that's better than another. Now, I told you I'd get way out there because my mind started musing on this, especially in a meditation. I got this. How many of you have seen the movie Truman? Only 2 of you? Really? Well, then I'm going to have to explain what the movie is. Jim Carrey, if you can recognize him, and by the way, all these little pixelated things are little vignettes out of his life, just little pictures of his life that are drawn together to make the picture of him. It's a very strange movie because, you know, the reality shows that we have, Truman was a reality show that from the day of his birth, they started a reality show that did nothing but show him 24/7, 365. And they created, I don't know what the city was called, but I'm going to call it Trumanville. And there's this little city, if you were to see a map of it, he was on an island. And everybody that he ran into, all of the buildings, the job that he had, all of it was a fabrication of the reality show in order to be able to see how he would react when he had a girlfriend, when he had to interview for a job, when he went to school, when he went to college, and all these groups that he would interact with. And you'd see how did Truman handle it, and he has no idea this is happening. All right? So the movie gets to the point where he finally figures it out, and he sees the man behind the curtain sort of thing, and he's going, wait a minute. Can you imagine getting to be in your 30s as he was supposed to be at that point and realizing that this entire world around him was just a world that was created for his reality show, and that billions of people around the world were watching this thing? That's what it was, what the movie was about. But it occurred to me, and this is the image that came to my mind when I'm going, okay, all of us have free will. The Course in Miracles is in agreement with that. And everything that we encounter is a dream, illusory. It's not real. You're going, how do I know all of you are real? How do I know I'm not living in John Schroederville right now and that all of you have just been brought about? I mean, what are the odds that you are going to be able to reflect to me exactly what's going to help me in my spiritual growth if you haven't been pre-programmed to do that? What makes you free-willed individuals any more than the people that were just paid actors to be able to act in a certain way and respond a certain way to Truman right there? And so I'm looking at that going, boy, isn't that the rabbit hole that they try to warn you away from, right? But the fact is that I just came up with a reality right there that actually fits what the Course in Miracles is talking about, even though the Course in Miracles would say there's no way that's the truth. But isn't it logical to think, how could I possibly have you reflecting to me exactly what I need for my spiritual growth and vice versa if we all have free will? I mean, the odds of that coming up is either 100% or 0. So figure out which end of that you're on as far as whether everything works to the greater good in that scenario. And we are at the end.